The 47th surgeon, a man with a jawline as sharp as his reputation, concluded his report with a sigh that cost more than Seth's monthly rent. From his post outside the glass-walled conference room, Seth watched the billionaire, Oliver Finch, clench that same sharp jaw. His wife, Isabella, sat beside him, a statue carved from grief, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white stones. For 3 weeks, Seth had ferried these specialists from private jets to the gleaming hospital entrance, their leather briefcases filled with theories that dissolved like sugar in the face of the boy's suffering. Oliver Finch, age 9, was a medical enigma, his small body racked by seizures that defied every scan, every test, and every 7-figure consultation. Seth, the driver, was just part of the expensive, silent machinery of their panic. He was paid to be invisible, a ghost in a black town car. But he wasn't invisible, he was a witness. He saw the untouched food trays, heard the hushed, defeated whispers of nurses, and felt the oppressive chill of the hallway, a cold that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. He'd lived in this chill before. As the surgeons filed out, their faces a gallery of frustration, Seth overheard one of them mutter, "The pre-seizure aura is the strangest part. He says it smells like ozone, like rain on hot pavement." A jolt went through Seth, a phantom pain that was 8 years old but still sharp enough to steal his breath. He instinctively touched the worn fabric of his jacket, right over his heart, where he kept a folded, tattered piece of paper. The smell of rain. He knew that smell. He knew it all too well. Seth's apartment was 2 small rooms over a laundromat, a space that always smelled faintly of clean linen and his daughter's strawberry shampoo. Poppy, his own 9-year-old, was a sunbeam in his perpetually weary world. She was currently drawing at their small kitchen table, her tongue stuck out in concentration as she gave a cartoon unicorn a rainbow-striped mane. "Is Mr. Finch's little boy still sick, Daddy?" she asked, not looking up. Seth's heart clenched. "Yeah, sweet pea. He's still sick." He knelt beside her, the ache in his knees a familiar companion. On the shelf above the table sat a single, framed photograph, a smiling woman with eyes the same bright shade as Poppy's. Sarah. His late wife. The seizures had started subtly with her, too. A flicker in her vision, a momentary confusion. The doctors had been just as baffled then, a decade ago, without the Finch fortune to fuel their search. They'd called it stress, then migraines, then a conversion disorder. Seth, a mechanic back then, had started taking notes. He filled a cheap, spiral-bound notebook with observations, tracking everything she ate, the weather, the lights in the grocery store, the scent of the cleaning products his boss used. He'd filled 3 notebooks by the time she was gone, a desperate, handwritten encyclopedia of a mystery no one had cared enough to solve. He pulled one of those notebooks from a dusty box under his bed. The pages were yellowed, the ink faded. He flipped to a page dated a month before she died. His own frantic scrawl stared back at him, "Aura again. Said it smelled like rain. Happened after she ate the leftover takeout." The lights in the kitchen were flickering. He was back at the hospital, long after his shift had officially ended. He couldn't go home, not really. The ghost of his own failure was walking these sterile halls with him. He sat in the public waiting area, the vinyl cool against his tired back, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee from the vending machine. The fluorescent lights hummed, a sound that set his teeth on edge. He saw Isabella Finch emerge from the private wing, her composure finally cracking under the weight of another sleepless night. She didn't go to the private lounge her husband had commandeered, she walked toward the main exit, her steps unsteady. She stopped when she saw him, a flicker of surprise in her exhausted eyes. "Seth? What are you still doing here?" Her voice was thin, brittle. He was just the driver. He should be gone. "Thought I'd wait," he said, his own voice quiet. "In case you needed anything." It was a simple, honest answer. He wasn't looking for overtime. He was offering a sliver of human solidarity in a place that had been stripped of it. She hesitated, then sank into the chair opposite him. She looked at his cheap coffee, then at his worn jacket, and for the first time, she seemed to see him not as an employee, but as a person. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, slightly squashed chocolate bar Poppy had insisted he take. He pushed it across the table. "My daughter says chocolate helps." A tear, just one, escaped and traced a path down Isabella's cheek. She didn't take the chocolate, but she nodded, a silent acknowledgement that his small, clumsy gesture had landed somewhere soft. The next afternoon, the shrill alarm echoed down the corridor. A code blue. Oliver's room. Seth was standing by the nurse's station, waiting for instructions, when the chaos erupted. Nurses and doctors sprinted past him. Through the window of the room, he saw the small boy's body convulsing violently on the bed. Isabella was pressed into a corner, her hand over her mouth, while Alistair Finch stood by the door, his face a mask of cold fury. "Get them out," he roared at two junior residents who were fumbling with equipment. "Get me the chief of neurology. Now." Seth watched Alistair's rage, a destructive force that helped no one. It was the impotent anger of a man used to buying solutions, who couldn't comprehend a problem that refused his money. Later, after Oliver was stabilized but left drained and unresponsive, Alistair cornered the head of the department. 47 specialists, he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "I have flown in 47 of the world's best minds, and my son is getting worse. This is unacceptable." He gestured dismissively at the corridor, at the staff, at the entire world that was failing him. His gaze swept right over Seth, as if he were a coat rack. In that moment, Isabella looked from her husband's furious face to Seth's quiet, pained one across the hall. She saw one man trying to conquer the world and another who simply understood its sorrow. The contrast was a quiet, devastating revelation. A nurse wheeled an untouched dinner tray out of Oliver's room. Steamed chicken, white rice, green beans, bland, hospital-approved fare. Seth saw it and a memory surfaced, sharp and clear. Sarah, turning her head away from a plate of food just like it. "It just feels wrong," she had whispered, unable to explain it. Seth looked at the tray, then at the drawn, pale face of Isabella through the glass. He knew Alistair had ordered the finest organic ingredients, the purest bottled water. But maybe they were looking in the wrong place. Maybe it wasn't about purity, but simplicity. He walked down to the hospital cafeteria, the scent of disinfectant and old coffee thick in the air. He scanned the menu, his eyes skipping over the processed sandwiches and sugary drinks. He found what he was looking for in the soup section. He bought a simple cup of beef bone broth, the kind made with nothing but bones, water, and salt. It was peasant food. It cost him $4. He carried the steaming styrofoam cup back to the private wing. Isabella was standing outside the room, looking lost. He didn't say a word. He just placed the cup on the small table by the wall, gave her a brief, hesitant nod, and retreated to his post down the hall. He watched as she stared at the cup, confused. Then, after a long moment, she picked it up. A little while later, he saw her through the window, patiently spooning the warm liquid into her son's mouth. Oliver, who hadn't kept anything down in 2 days, swallowed it. And then he swallowed another spoonful. The next day, Alistair Finch assembled his team again, this time with a video link to a renowned clinic in Zurich. They were planning to move Oliver, a risky and desperate gambit. Seth stood outside the conference room, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm against his ribs. He could hear their voices, muffled but clear, through the door. "The recurring olfactory aura is the key," the face on the screen was saying. "The smell of petrichor, or ozone. It suggests a limbic system anomaly, perhaps a microlesion undetectable by current MRI technology." They used words like lesion and anomaly, cold and clinical terms. Seth thought of his notebook. He thought of Sarah describing the scent after he'd used a new brand of air freshener in the car. He thought of her getting dizzy under the fluorescent lights at the supermarket. It wasn't a lesion. It was a trigger. A simple, environmental trigger. He knew it. He felt it in his bones, a certainty born from love and loss. Alistair was ending the call, giving orders. "Have the jet ready. We fly tonight." The decision was made. It was over. Seth's moment was gone. But then he saw Isabella's reflection in the glass. He saw the utter defeat in her eyes, the last flicker of hope dying out. He couldn't let it happen. He couldn't stand by and watch another family be torn apart by a mystery he might be able to solve. He took a deep breath, straightened his worn jacket, and pushed the door open. All heads turned. Alistair's face contorted with disbelief. Seth ignored him. He looked directly at Isabella, at the mother who had accepted his cup of broth, and whispered, his voice trembling but clear, "Let me. Let you." Alistair Finch's voice was a whip crack in the silent room. Let you what? Get back to your car. Security. He reached for the intercom on the table, his face flushed with indignation. The idea that a driver, a servant, would dare to interrupt him was an insult of the highest order. But Isabella's hand shot out, covering his. Wait, she said, her voice quiet but firm. Her eyes were locked on Seth's. She saw no arrogance there, only a deep, painful earnestness. What is it, Seth? Alistair stared at his wife, aghast. The assembled doctors shifted uncomfortably, unsure of the protocol for a billionaire's domestic dispute. Seth's throat was dry. He clutched the lapels of his jacket, a nervous habit. It's not a lesion, he said, his voice gaining strength. It's the environment. The triggers. He spoke not to the doctors, but to Isabella. My wife, she had this. The same thing. It wasn't in her brain, it was what was happening to her brain. He pulled the tattered notebook from his pocket and laid it on the polished mahogany table. It looked absurdly out of place among the iPads and leather-bound portfolios. The smell of rain, you said. For her, it was that, but also, preservatives. Sodium benzoate. Certain food dyes. The hum from fluorescent lights. Synthetic fragrances in soap. He flipped through the pages, showing them his desperate, meticulous record of a life falling apart. I tracked it all. It's all here. A younger neurologist leaned forward, his professional skepticism warring with his curiosity. He picked up the notebook, his eyes scanning the detailed, dated entries. This is an incredible longitudinal study, Alistair scoffed. It's scribbling. Get him out of here. No, Isabella said again, her voice ringing with newfound authority. She stood up, placing herself between her husband and Seth. We have tried everything your money can buy, Alistair. We have listened to 47 experts who have all failed. This man is not an expert. He's a husband who watched his wife die. Maybe he saw something everyone else missed. She turned to the young neurologist who held the notebook. Is there any harm in trying this? The doctor looked from the notebook to Seth, then to his superiors. Harm? No. It's unorthodox. But the observations are specific. We could change his environment completely. Remove all potential chemical and sensory triggers based on these notes. A total dietary reset. No processed anything. Full spectrum, natural lighting only. Unscented everything. The chief of medicine looked at Alistair, awaiting the final word. Alistair Finch, a man who had never been contradicted in his own boardroom, was trapped. His rage was fighting a desperate war with his fear. Isabella's gaze did not waver. Finally, his shoulders slumped in a barely perceptible defeat. Fine, he bit out. Try it. But when it fails, I'm holding all of you responsible. For the next 24 hours, the VIP suite was transformed. The harsh lights were replaced, the air purifiers removed, the designer soaps and lotions swapped for simple, unscented bars. Oliver's diet was reduced to broth, baked sweet potatoes, and pears, foods Seth's notes indicated were safe. An entire hospital held its breath. 24 hours passed. No seizures. Then 48. Oliver opened his eyes and asked for his mother. By the 72-hour mark, he was sitting up in bed, color returning to his cheeks, talking to a nurse about his favorite video game. The miracle wasn't loud. It was quiet. It was the absence of a storm. Alistair Finch stood by his son's bedside, watching him sleep peacefully for the first time in a month. The billionaire looked smaller, diminished. He approached Seth in the hallway, his posture stiff and awkward. He pulled out a checkbook. Name your price, he said, his voice flat. A new job. A house. Whatever you want. You saved him. Seth looked at the checkbook, then into the eyes of a man who only knew how to transact. I don't want your money, Mr. Finch, Seth said quietly. My wife, we didn't have your resources. I couldn't save her. I just wanted your son to be okay. He left the words hanging in the air, a gentle indictment of a world that put a price on everything. Alistair stared, speechless, as Seth walked away. He had offered the king's ransom, and it had been refused. The gesture broke something in him, a fundamental belief in the power of his own wealth. A few hours later, Isabella found Seth as he was preparing to finally go home. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but for the first time in weeks, they held light. "Thank you," she whispered, and the words were imbued with a universe of meaning. It wasn't the thanks of an employer to an employee. It was the profound, soul-deep gratitude of one parent to another. "You have a daughter, don't you?" "Poppy." Seth nodded, startled that she remembered. "I would love to meet her," Isabella said. "Oliver would, too. When he's home. Could you and Poppy join us for dinner?" As our friends, the invitation was the real payment, an offer of inclusion into a world that had always held him at arm's length. 6 months later, the autumn sun cast a golden glow over a city park. Oliver Finch, no longer a pale ghost in a hospital bed, ran with surprising speed toward the swings, his laughter echoing in the crisp air. Chasing after him was Poppy, her rainbow-striped backpack bouncing as she ran. Seth and Isabella watched them from a park bench. The sterile hospital corridor felt like a lifetime ago. The Finch Foundation had since launched a multi-million-dollar research initiative, the SARA Project, dedicated to studying environmental and dietary triggers for neurological disorders. Seth, the former driver, was now its lead consultant, his tattered notebooks forming the basis of its charter. He met with families, listened to their stories, and helped them find patterns in their own chaos. He was no longer invisible. Alastair, humbled and changed, had poured his resources into the project with a convert's zeal, but he remained a distant figure. The true connection had formed here, on this bench. Isabella gently bumped her shoulder against Seth's. "Look at them," she said softly. Poppy was now pushing Oliver on the swing, her small frame straining with the effort, his joyful shouts urging her higher. They were just 2 kids playing in a park. 2 children who had their futures back. A new kind of family was being forged before their eyes, one built not on a shared name or fortune, but on shared vulnerability and the profound strength of quiet kindness. And Seth finally understood. True power wasn't about commanding the world, it was about having the courage to notice the small, crucial details, and the heart to whisper, "Let me," when someone was in need. How many other quiet heroes were out there, just waiting to be seen?